Chelik Tezayin, Yisro, the 5th Sichah. The booklets, it's the first one that I printed. Okay, the theme of the Sichah is going to be discussing, there's a concept of mosipim מחול על הקודש, that we're going to learn different sources that we have to add from kodesh, from holiness to the mundane. In other words, before Shabbos, we have to add some time mundane to the holiness, yeah. And then also at the end of Shabbos, when Shabbos finishes, we have to prolong Shabbos a little bit to bring the Kedusha also into the Matzah Shabbos. So we're going to learn exactly where that comes from. So he says like this. Ois Aleph. If in Pasuk Zochar Shem HaShabbos the Katshay, on the Pasuk it says in our Parsha, but Aseres Adibris, remember the Shabbos and sanctify it. State in Mechilta, so the Mechilta says, Zochar v'Shomer, the words Zochar and Shomer, Shneim Nemru b'Dibur Echad. Hashem said these two words in one utterance. In other words, in our Parsha it says Zochar, and in Parshas Kiseitze it says Shomer. These two words, Zochar v'Shomer, were said b'Dibur Echad. Mechilta continues, Mechalaleo moisyumos ubiyem HaShabbos shnei kvasim shneim nemru b'dibur echad. The pasuk that says that those who profane the Shabbos, those who work on Shabbos, are put to death. Yet another pasuk says that we have to bring 2 lambs on Shabbos, which that's malachas. So, on one hand, the Torah says mechalaleo moisyumos, that if you work on Shabbos, if you do malachas, any of the 39 malachas, you're chayim misa. And then it says, Ubiyem HaShabbos, you should bring the Shnei Kvasim. So the Mechilta says, these 2 psukim were said, these 2 contradictions were said b'dibur echad. Third example, Ervas Eishes Achicha. The pasuk says that the nakedness of your brother's wife, which means that a person is not allowed to have relations with his sister-in-law. And the pasuk also says, Yivamei Yovei Aleh. The pasuk also says that her brother-in-law shall come unto her. If, God forbid, let's take, for example, Reuven is married to Leah, and Reuven dies without children. Reuven has a brother, Shimon. Shimon now has to marry, there's a mitzvah of Yibum, that Shimon now has to marry Leah. So even though the Torah says that Ervas Eishes Achicha, one cannot have relations, cannot marry a sister-in-law. In the case of Yibum, he can. Then a fourth example, Leisil b'Shatnis. The Torah says you're not allowed to wear shatnis. It also says Gudilim Ta'aselecha. It also says you shall make dilim tzitzis for yourself. So he says Shneim Nemru b'Dibur Echad. These 2 utterances were said, or these 2 commands were said with one utterance. And the Mechilta says, this is impossible for a person to speak this way. As it says, fine. So simple pshat of the Medrash of the Mechilta is saying that Zochar Shem HaShabbos the Katshay, Zochar and Shomer were said together, Mechalel Moisyumos, and the contradiction of Uvayim HaShabbos Shnei Kvasim was said together. Ervas Eishes Achicha, Yivamei Yovei Aleh was set together, and Leisil b'Shatnis, however, Gdilim Ta'aselecha, tzitzis you could make of Shatnis. Now, Vayter, Mamshech and Mechilta, then the Mechilta continues and says, Zochar v'Shomer, when we say Zochar, you should remember, and you should guard. What does that mean? So he says like this, Zochar milofanov, you shall safeguard it beforehand, remember it beforehand, V'Shamar, and safeguarded melacharav afterwards. What does that mean? Vikan amru, from here we rule, and mosipim mechol ala kodesh, we add from the mundane to the holy. Mashal leze'ev, this is compared to a wolf. Shu taidif. Taidif means he grabs, he mauls, he rips away. Milafanav u'malachedev, which is in front of it and what's it behind it. Fine. Asks the Rebbe, Daf from Varstein, we have to understand. We need clarity. Says you do as Ali Pirushim if in selben Wort oder Inyan haben zwischen sich Sheiches. It's known that every interpretation has some type of connection between each other. Especially in our case, these two expositions, these two explanations follow one another. So asks the Rebbe, was is die Sheiches von dem ersten Maimer Mechilta? Because die alle in Jana was nemmer b'diber echad mit die Maimer Zacher melafana v'shamar melachirav mikan amr mesif mechil ala kiddush. We have to understand what's the connection between the Mechilta's first teaching, remember Shabbos beforehand and safeguard it afterwards. And from here we learn that we have to add from the mundane to the holy. What's the connection between the two? Okay, so the Rebbe says in Beis now, but man das verstehen behektim habir in drashas ha-mechilta zachem melafanav b'shomer melachirav. We're going to understand this by first clarifying what the Medrash, what the Mechilta says. Remember it beforehand and safeguard it afterwards. Von dem was die Mechilta lernt aris, dem din meisif mechil ala kedesh, von Pasuk Zochar Yom HaShabbos is mashma, from the fact that the Mechilta says that where do I know that you have to add from the mundane onto the holy? We learn it out from Zochar Yom HaShabbos, that you have to remember the Shabbos, is mashma, so it implies as das is adin beikar by Shabbos, that this is a din, this is a law in regards to Shabbos, that there's a special din in Shabbos. What's a special din in Shabbos? That we have to add from the mundane, we have to add to the holy. Now, it doesn't say in halacha how much time that is, but there's a concept of that before Shabbos, let's say Shabbos is 24 hours, we have to add a little bit of kedusha beforehand. Shabbos ends at a certain time, add a certain little kedusha after. That's the idea of mesifim mechol HaKiddush. How much time? Doesn't say what. Doesn't say a time. But there's a concept of mesifim mechol. Now, Mechilta says that from Zocher Yom HaShabbos lekatche, I learn now mesifim mechol HaKiddush, which would imply that there's a special din only by Shabbos. Excuse me. So now the Rebbe says, Darfim for Hashem, we have to understand. The din mesifim mechol HaKiddush is doch gleich hazeh by Yom Kippur and Yom Tif. This halacha that you have to add from the mundane to the holy applies equally to Yom Kippur and Yom Tif. V'lashna Braisa b'Gemara, as the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah and the Braisa says, Kol makom shenemar shvais mesifim mechol HaKiddush. The Gemara says that anywhere the word shvais, to rest, is commanded to us, we have to add from the mundane to the holy. So l'chayr, this din of mesifim mechol HaKiddush applies to Yom Kippur and Yom Tif. Now the Rebbe says, Mekenet zogin, as the limud is nor and asmachta ba'alma from pasuk. You can't say that this that we learn out, mesifim mechol HaKiddush from Zochar Yom HaShabbos lekatche, that's like it's called a asmachta. Asmachta means that you have like something to rely on in Torah, but we don't use that as a source. It's not the source of the din. It's only like a textual concept. So what? It's a support, but it's not a source. So he says you can't say that mesifim mechol HaKiddush means that from Zochar Yom HaShabbos lekatche we have a smachta of mesifim mechol HaKiddush, but really, where do we learn it out from? We learn it out like the Mechilta says that kol makom shenemar shvais means mesifim mechol HaKiddush. Now it says by Yom Kippur v'inisem es nafshei seichem me'erev la'erev tishbesu shabbatchem, that on Yom Kippur you have to fast, and then it says me'erev la'erev tishbesu l'shon shvais. So l'chayra, maybe the Mechilta, the source of mesifim mechol HaKiddush is from that pasuk of shvais. Anytime it says shvais, and Zochar Yom HaShabbos lekatche is only asmachta. The Rebbe says you can't say that. Why? Warum die drasha? Turn over the page 232. Warum die drasha Mechilta werd gebracht zwischen andere drashas welche zijn niet kein asmachta. These interpretations are brought in the same Mechilta for mamish dinim, not asmachtas, nor from welchem learned up the dinim from Torah. This is he's going to bring in a second. In the Mechilta we learn in the same Mechilta, in the same paragraph, he's bringing from these psukim of Zochar Yom HaShabbos lekatche dinim that we learn halacha l'maisa. And he says in the parentheses what that is. He says like this: From them was Zochar Shomer Shneim Nemar b'diber echad. So he says that from Zocher v'Shomer was said in one utterance, Lentman up, we learn out as Noshim Chayovos b'Kiddush Hayom Dvar Torah, that a woman is chayiv in Kiddush by day, and that's Minat Torah. Why? L'chayra, if Kiddush is a mitzvah asay shazman grama, why is a woman mechuyev? Val kol she yeshne b'shmira yeshne b'schira. Anytime, any din that which means any lois asay that a woman is mechuyeves in yeshne b'schira, she has the din of schira. So zachasem Shabbos, she has to also do the Kiddush. Von dem was mechalelo meisumos, wie Shabbos nikvasim, eres eishes achicha yuvam yavela, leisil b'shanis gdim taslecha, b'diber achademer, lentman up. The Mechilta says hakravas tamid b'Shabbos, that you have to bring the carbon tamid on Shabbos. Yibum und kilayim b'tzitzis, and that there's a mitzvah of yibum and kilayim b'tzitzis. Und die drasha shalachar ze Mechilta te zoichte be'echa b'Shabbos, and the Mechilta says that you have to remember on Sunday that if, let's say, either on Sunday or one of the days, a nice portion, you get a nice portion, so what should you do? If you come into the store and you see a nice piece of flesh, so buy it and prepare it and set it aside for Shabbos, because that's Shammai. Like the Shita of Beishamai. In other words, not like Beisilo. The drasha from Rabbi Yitzchak, and then the Mechilta brings down the drasha from Rabbi Yitzchak, as Likkutei meinik kederach sha'achin meinin. You should not count when it comes to Shabbos like other people count. Atei meinin l'shem Shabbos. You have to count for Shabbos. That's why every day we say Hayom Yom Shein l'Shabbos, Hayom Yom Shlishi b'Shabbos, etc. But the din is Aschir Shabbos darf sein nit nor b'Yom Shabbos nor oich a ganze Woche, which means that to remember Shabbos shouldn't only be on Shabbos, but a whole week you have to remember Shabbos. Is das haramban a mitzvah seminat Torah, and that's why according to the Ramban, other people argue on him, but according to the Ramban, there's a mitzvah say min haTorah to remember Shabbos every single day. So from Mechilta, I'm learning out from the word Zachasem Shabbos Takachi, all these different dinim. You can't say that when it comes to Mosfim Mechil al Kodesh, that's asmachti. It doesn't make sense. So that's what the Rabbi says. Zadeichik gadol zu sagen. It's a deichik to say as the drasha Zachem lefanov v'shamar malacheda was kumen allein zwischen die drashas anal soll sein asmachta bam. It's very it's not. Doesn't make sense to say that punkt. All the dinim that the Mechilta brings is a din min atera, and this is a asmachta. So now, what's the question? The Chayra comes out from the Mechilta that we learn out the din of Mesifim Mechol HaKedesh. It's a din only in Shabbos, and the Chayra, according to the Brayso, the Gemara, Mesifim Mechol HaKedesh applies to Shabbos, Yom Tif, and Yom Kippur. Zog the Rebbe Gimel. Seemingly we could say, as in them, it's taka machlekes between the Mechilta and the Brayso. That you're right, that there's taka dispute between the Mechilta and the Brayso. And maybe the Mechilta doesn't maintain that anywhere the word shvais, rest, is commanded to us, we have to add from the mundane to the holy. So, you can say very simple. The Mechilta doesn't hold that Mesifim Mechol HaKedesh applies to Yom Kippur and Yom Tif. So the Rebbe says, we don't want to say that. Why not? So he says, since we have a rule that we don't need to add arguments if we don't need to, doesn't always have to be politics. Sometimes we try to say that people should get along. It's a famous din in Shas. If we could say that the two opinions can get along, let's not make more machlekes. Doesn't make sense to say, it's not logical to say that the Mechilta and the Brayso, the Gemara, are arguing. See, the din for Tesefes is nor by Yom Shabbos or the Ich by Yom Kippur. If the din of Tesefes Shabbos applies to Shabbos or also Yom Tov and Yom Kippur. So the Rebbe says, no, the chiluk zwischen zeh is nor mashmois darshan. The difference between them is in the mashmois of how we learn it, which means later Brayso learned up the Tesefes by Shabbos from Zalman Pasuk for Yom Kippur and Yom Tov. That according to the Brayso, the Gemara, he learns out Tesefes Shabbos from the same source that I learn out Yom Kippur and Yom Tif. Shenkin, like the Mechilta, is in Tesefes Shabbos Fanan an Uftu, was Nita by Yom Kippur Yom Tif. However, when it comes to The Mechilta, he's going to learn that Tosefes Shabbos, there's a special din of Tosefes Shabbos over Yom Kippur and Yom Tov. Und dem Chiddush lernt man auch von Pasuk Zachar Shem Shabbos. And this Chiddush we learn out from Zachar Shem Shabbos the Kachik. Schenken the Braisa halt, as by Shabbos is da Chiddush miyuchad. However, according to the Braisa, he learns that Shabbos there's a special Chiddush, as das is verbunden damit, was man lernt up dem Din by Shabbos from Yom Kippur. So, in other words, like this. Everybody agrees there's a din of Mosfim Mechol al HaKodesh. The Braisa is going to learn that I learn out these Mosfim Mechol al HaKodesh, Shabbos, Yom Kippur, and Yom Tov. I learn it out from the same pasuk, Shvais, Tishpesu. However, according to the Mechilta, yes, there's a din of Mosfim Mechol al HaKodesh from Tishpesu on Yom Kippur and Yom Tov. Shabbos, there's a different type of Mosfim Mechol al HaKodesh. So he says, Shloimy, we're holding 233, second paragraph. Shloimy, der Chiddush is in Tosefes Shabbos is the Mechilta Menames mit Mashal Zev Shuterim Melafenim Machirev. The Mechilta wants to bring out this idea of Tosefes Shabbos, whatever it is, the uniqueness of Tosefes Shabbos in Shabbos. How he wants to bring that out with a mashal. What's the mashal? The mashal of the Ze'ev. The wolf mauls from what's in front of him and what's from in back of him. So he says the ched is not moving. The Mefarshim fragen. All the Mefarshim ask, "Was gibt's to the mashal that Avana from the meaning from Mosfim Mechol HaKodesh? What are you adding by this mashal of a ze'ev to the din of Mosfim Mechol HaKodesh?" Utkidel kamon. Daled. The Asbara Bezes, he says, what's the explanation? The explanation is as follows: the din Mosfim Mechol HaKodesh came and learned of Drayefanim. This halacha that we have to add from the mundane to the holy could be understood in three ways. If you look in the Ha'aras, I was listening to a shir last night from somebody in Project Likkutei Sichos, doing an Ian shir. So he explained that if you look, we're going to learn three ways to learn Mosfim Mechol HaKodesh. If you look in the Ha'aras, the Rebbe is going to have like a fourth way to learn it, and then he brought from other Likkutei Sichos. Basically, he was trying to bring out that there's 12 ways to learn Mosfim Mechol HaKodesh. But let's keep it simple. The Rebbe brings now three different ways of how to learn Mosfim Mechol HaKodesh. What does it mean? Add from the holy. So he says like this. So the mitzvah if dem Adam as darf auf sich mekabel sein at the Shabbos. Nitzutan dan kein melach. So he says it's a mitzvah that requires the person to accept upon himself the addition to Shabbos, and not to do any melacha. However, if he transgressed and he didn't accept upon himself this addition, he could do malacha until the beginning of Shabbos, which means the beginning of Ben Hashemash's twilight. So that's the first way. The first way of how to learn Mosfim Mechol HaKodesh, that is a din on the gavra, it's a din on the person, that he needs to makabel upon himself to be Mosfim Mechol HaKodesh. What if he doesn't? What if he decides, I don't want to? He's not, nothing happens. He's allowed to do malacha. Beis, afilu when the mentions need makabel of sich Tosefes Shabbos, is if him chal der isser from lachas Shabbos and zman Tosefes bal korche. That says, Teirat ka'aser to tam malacha as mamasim for Shabbos. The second way to learn it is, even if a person does not accept it upon himself, the addition to Shabbos, the isser of performing malacha on Shabbos applies to him during the additional time against his will. This means that the Torah forbids the performance of malacha for a certain period of time before and after Shabbos. That's the second way to learn it. So the Rebbe says, und der Tzadashov and the Tzvei Fanim is was beides an Chiyuv Gavra. Now, the common denominator between the first way and learning and the second way is that it devolves upon the actual Gavra, upon the person. In other words, nor in dem Gufa can sein Tzvei Fanim. When you come to the Gavra, you can explain it in two ways. Either Aleph, the Isra, if in Gavra is Mitzad Zain Kabbalah, either the Isra on the Gavra is Mitzad because he has to accept it. If he doesn't accept it, then it's okay. Meaning, there's no Isra. And base is Chalif Imdim Isra Afilu Ven Eres Nidm Mekabel. And then you have that the Torah forbids the Isra devolves upon the person if he didn't accept it. That's the first two ways. The Rebbe says a third way. Adritte Neufen, the Yisro Mechol HaKodesh come from Shabbos allein. That the this idea of adding from the mundane to the holy derives from Shabbos itself. What does that mean? It was Sikdin Hayedua, like it's like the known expression. The Chefza from Shabbos is Meisim Elefonim Malachidim, which means that the Chefza, the Shabbos itself adds before and after it. The Kedusha Shabbos v'nispashat Melefonim Malachidim u'b'meila is that Adam demold Asar B'asiyas Malach, which means that the sanctity of Shabbos, itself adds time from before and after it. So automatically the person is forbidden to do malacha during these times. So again, there's three ways to learn. The first two is an inyan of gavra, that the Torah says, the Torah wants the person to be mekabel on himself, and if he doesn't, and he doesn't malacha at that time, then there's no issue. The second way of it is that it's on the gavra, but the Torah forces that if the person is not mekabel, the Torah forces you to be mekabel. So if you're going to do, so you're not allowed to do malacha at that time. The third way to learn it is nothing to do with the gavra. The chefts of Shabbos itself, the actual kedusha of Shabbos, makes that before Shabbos and afterwards there's a kedusha. Okay, so the Rebbe says now in Hey. And thus is the chiddush from mechilta. This is the innovation. This is the chiddush of the mechilta. The din for Mosfim mechilta kedusha shittas habraisa hashas. The halacha that you have to add from the mundane to the kedusha, according to the Gemara, is nor atziva ifin adam. This is a commandment on the person. Kol makom shenemar shvois. Whenever the Torah says shvois, like the Gemara says, Mosfim mechilta ala kedusha. This is adin shvisas adam. It's a halacha. It's a din in that the person resting. That he has to rest next to, right before Shabbos. However, like the Mechilta, according to the Mechilta, is by Shabbos the Atifra Inyan and then they say Tesus. According to the Mechilta, Shabbos has a deeper aspect to Tesus. A Shabbos Gufa is Meisim Melefonim Malachidim, which means that the sanctity of Shabbos itself adds to the time before and after. Und das is Musbar in the Mashal was wird gebracht in Mechilta, and this also is this analogy that the Mechilta brought down fits very well to this concept. Mashal Azev, we say that this is a compared to a wolf, shu teidef melefonim malachidim, which mauls from the front and from what's behind it. Punkt v'azev was is teidef melefonim malachidim. Azeh is echte yisaf mechil ala kedesh, and an efen as the Shabbos gufa is teidef melefonim malachidim. Just as in regards to a wolf, the wolf mauls from what's in front of it and what's behind it, so too, the addition of Shabbos is such that Shabbos itself, like mauls, it's Torah from what's in front of it and from what's behind it. Now the Rebbe says in the brackets, Shloimy, as eich das is mudgish in drashas ha-mechilta. We could say that this is also emphasized in the Mechilta's exposition. Was lernt der Reis dem Din von Zachar v'Shomer, which the Mechilta learns out from Zachar v'Shomer, which is what Zachar, a mitzvah asay, or mitzvah leis asay midei in Shabbos kufa. Zachar is the mitzvah asay, and Shomer is the mitzvah leis asay. Shaken like the Gemara, however, according to the Gemara, was we learned Zeh Allah from Yom Kippur. According to the Gemara, we learn out all these dinim from Yom Kippur. Is the limud as maskum masanim b'yim from v'nisam as nafshay seichem b'tisha. So where does the Mechilta? Where does the Gemara learn out these din that you have to start fasting a little bit erev Yom Kippur from? Where does he learn that out? From v'nisam as nafshay seichem b'tisha. Which is mudgish has das is nidr is man from Yitzum Shayim, which means that according to the Brisa, we're not emphasizing the power of Yitzum Shayim. According to the Mechilta, he says that Shabbos has a certain chefts of kedusha. That Shabbos itself makes that what's in front of Shabbos and what's behind Shabbos makes a kedusha. So therefore, it fits very nicely that he learns that also Zachar v'Shomer, that Zachar is a mitzvah aseh, mitzvah leis aseh. However, according to the Gemara, the Gemara doesn't learn out that Shabbos has a chefts of kedusha. So therefore, that's also emphasized that he learns out everything from Mebei Yom. Okay, so then he says back, let's right there after the brackets. The tam for vos the din is ladas mechilta. Dafka by Shabbos and nit by Yom Kippur Yom Tov. Fine. So you told me a very nice chakira. You said that the difference between Shabbos, Yom Tov, and Yom Kippur is Shabbos has a certain chefts of kedusha that automatically makes Shabbos, a little before Shabbos, and afterwards Kaddish. So now the question is, why is that? Why is that? Why are you saying that Shabbos is different? So he says, Al das is behesim to klal is chilik zwischen kedusha Shabbos and kedusha Yom Kippur Yom Tov. This also is behesim to the general difference between Shabbos and Yom Tov. Shabbos is mekatsha v'kaima. Shabbos, as we know, the Gemara says in Beitza, Shabbos attains its own kedusha on its own. Says kedusha be'etzim dr chefza von Shabbos. That when Shabbos comes, you have a certain kedusha of Shabbos. When the far is euch taste of Shabbos and in was kommt von der Kavra. So if Shabbos itself has a chefza of kedusha, the taste of Shabbos also has a chefza of kedusha. Or nit totally in Gavra, so it has nothing to do with the person. Yom Kippur Yom Tov is Yisro the Kachinu Lizmani. However, when it comes to Yom Kippur and Yom Tov, the Gemara in Bracha says that the Yidden are the ones that make Rosh Chodesh. The Yidden are the ones that make Yom Tov. When Mela is Eich Teistus Yom Kippur Yom Tov, nit kein Inyan was werd von Sichah it's at Chefze von Yom Kippur Yom Tov. So therefore, according to, so based on this logic, Yom Kippur and Yom Tov don't have a Chefze of Kedusha. Why? Because it's dependent on the person. The person, we Yidden are the ones who make Yom Tov. Nor das is adin was verbunden mit Gavra. This is a din which has to do with the Gavra. So basically, what we established is the difference between that Shabbos has a special chefza of kedusha, which is not totally on the person, and therefore the Mechilta is going to say that from Zohar to Shabbos to Katshay, we learn out that Shabbos has not that Yom Kippur and Yom Tov do not have a din of taste of Shabbos. They do, but the taste of Shabbos of Yom Tov is totally on the Gavra. The taste of Shabbos of Shabbos, according to the Mechilta, has nothing to do with the Gavra. The Chefza itself, Shabbos is Halik, and automatically, before and afterwards, also brings that Halik.